Tuning into the TMI show with me, Ted Rall, and normally with Manila Chan, but today Manila is out training for Space Force. Producer Robby West is sitting in the producer's chair and the co-host chair for the hour. So thanks for being here. You're watching the Ted Manila Information Show, also known as the Too Much Information Show, or whatever acronyms you like. We're here Monday through Friday.
Robby show. Because yesterday, or the Too Much Robby show, because yesterday was me and Scott Stannis.
Yeah, that was like the RSI show. You didn't get my joke in the chat where I was like, repetitive stress injury, Robby Scott information. It didn't.
Well, you got to. Well, Ted, I mean, as you and anyone that's been watching the show for a while know, I mean, y'all know that there are days I'm kind of retarded.
Well,
so
frankly, you also have you are 2 hours behind the true America here on the East Coast. So, that also explains it. I mean, if I had to do this show at 8 o'clock in the morning, getting ready at like 5, I would be not very less. And I'm pretty retarded as it is. Anyway, we're here Monday through Friday live, 10 a.m. Eastern time, 8 in the Mountain Time, where Robby is 7 on the West Coast. You know how to do the math for the rest of it. Lots to talk about today, and we're just going to move fast through it. By the way, just a little bit of business. Please like, follow, and share the show. Also, Scott Stantis and I are going to be doing a live DMZ America. We'll be talking about some of the same topics and some other stuff at 12 noon Eastern time as well. Also on YouTube and Rumble. So please try checking that out. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the aftermath and the blowback from Israel's attack against Doha, Qatar. We're going to get into a trial in Texas that you probably would miss. I almost did, where a dude basically is on trial for writing graffiti that said F Israel, except he didn't say F. He spelled the whole thing out. We'll get into all that. Curious to hear Robby's thoughts on that and everything else. France is in chaos. 250 plus people have been arrested. The entire country is on lockdown. All the major cities are in crisis due to the collapse of the French government and the Macron's policies. We'll be getting into what all that means. Also, remarkable change of fate for Israel, or for in terms of public opinion here in New York City, where I live, which is, of course, got the highest Jewish population in the world outside of Israel. Now, New Yorkers have turned against Israel. More New Yorkers sympathize with the Palestinians. New Yorkers sympathize with the Palestinians than Israel. That's even true about Jewish New Yorkers specifically. So Israel's really underwater here, and I don't see them coming back. And then finally, this interesting study from UNICEF, the face of malnutrition is changing from one of gauntness to obesity. Obesity is a form of, it can be a manifestation of malnutrition, and now it is. And UNICEF now says 1 out of 10 children in the world is affected by obesity. We'll get into why that is. Newsflash, it's going to be obviously the shitty food that we eat. All right, so Robby, are you down? Should we just get to it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Imagine a Jaws, and now we're on to it. Okay, so Qatar, I like Qatar better, threatened to retaliate against.
Hey, maybe you're the retarded guy this morning.
Thank you.
Maybe I got the day off.
Yeah, maybe so. Playing the role of retard will be understudy Ted Rall. All right, let me try that again. Qatar threatened to retaliate against Israel in the wake of an airstrike in Doha that targeted but missed the leaders of Hamas, as the prime minister of Qatar called the situation a decisive moment for the Middle East. Quote, "The state of Qatar is committed to act in a decisive way with anything that would target its territories and will reserve the right to retaliate and will take all the needed measures to retaliate," Sheikh Mohammed Abdulrahman al-Thani declared at a news conference yesterday. That, according to Al Jazeera. Al-Thani described the attack on Hamas as state terrorism that's being exerted by someone like Netanyahu. I think that we've reached a decisive moment. There should be retaliation from the whole region in the face of those barbaric actions that only reflect one thing, reflects the barbarism of this person that is leading the region, unfortunately to a point where we cannot address any situation. We cannot repair anything. We cannot work within the frameworks of international laws. Al-Thani added, he just violates all those international laws. Khalil al-Hayy and Zahir Zabain, were two targets of the explosion, according to Israeli news reports. Al-Haya was recently involved in talks for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the remaining 20 hostages. Zahir Zabarin is responsible for Hamas's finances. He's a key player in their West Bank operations. He was reportedly involved in the negotiations as well, although his role was less important. The White House said Tuesday that prior to the attack, Trump immediately directed Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to call the Qataris and tell them of an impending attack by Israel. A spokesperson for Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs later pushed back on Levitt's remarks, however, calling it a lie, saying that statements being circulated about Qatar being informed of the attack in advance are baseless. The call from a U.S. official came during the sound of explosions caused by the Israeli attack in Doha, the official wrote. I would believe the Qataris here. So the warning may have been issued as quickly as Trump found out about it, but it was too late for the Qataris to do anything and too late to do any good. I have a lot of thoughts here, Robby. So first of all, what a lot of people might not be aware of is that, okay, Israel, they can say we're going to go after Hamas anywhere where they are because after all, they attacked us on October 7th and we can do that. And they've been shooting rockets. What they're leaving out of all this is that Qatar was set up as as neutral ground in this negotiation on purpose by the Israelis and by the Trump administration. The Americans and the Israelis asked Qatar to serve as an intermediary here, and basically said this will be neutral ground where the Israelis can travel to, and they have, to meet with their Hamas counterparts, and they have, and they can talk things out. I mean, it's not neutral. The whole point of neutral ground is that nobody can attack you on neutral ground. Not to mention, there's the whole issue of the Israelis attacking the ceasefire negotiators. So if I was a cynical bastard, I would say the Israelis aren't very serious about wanting to negotiate a ceasefire or about getting their hostages back, because they're trying to kill the people that they're trying to negotiate with. And you can't really negotiate with people who have been killed. And if you fail to kill them, they're pissed at you. Okay. So am I missing anything there, Robby? I'm sure I am.
No, and I was actually going to ask you this question, and maybe I'll deprogram later on. I'll ask both you and John together, because y'all are both much smarter than I am, retardation notwithstanding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you say that you want peace and you've been negotiating, and I use that term very loosely when it comes to Israel, it's typically not a good idea to bomb the people that you're negotiating with. And I like to point out, this is not the first time Israel's done this. They have a track record of bombing diplomats who they're negotiating with. They also have a track record of attacking other countries in the middle of active negotiations, looking at you, Iran. So let's not forget that this is something that's Israel's playbook. And, whenever Trump said, no, Netanyahu didn't call him, Netanyahu didn't tell him what was going on, I'm going to turn to believe him, because why would Netanyahu talk to middle management about something he was going to do? I mean, I wouldn't.
Now, John pointed out on Deprogram last night, live Monday through Friday, 5 p.m., that there was that Qatar hosts the biggest U.S. Air Force base on Earth, which must be pretty big. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, home of the biggest Air Force base in the United States, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the Wright brothers first experimented with flight. So I can't even imagine how big that thing is. To put that into perspective, the circumference of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is 12 miles, and that used to be a hike that I used to do in Boy Scouts, the Wright brothers trail. This must be a massive base. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops are there. I mean, what I'm sure the Qataris are contacting the Americans and saying, dudes, John said this yesterday, I was stealing this from him. Like, guys, what is the point of us hosting a giant U.S. Air Force base if your own asshole allies, your butt buddies, are coming over here to bomb the shit of us right downtown? And by the way, they missed the guys that they were trying to kill and killed some other randos instead, including a Qatari security official. So, it's a bad fucking look.
Why are you being anti-Semitic? I mean, listen, listen, just because Israel missed with an assassination attempt and blew up a bunch of random people, including some dude just trying to make a living. I mean, the fact that you're pointing that out as a blood libel. And Ted, you should be ashamed. I'll tell you what you need to do right now. Here's your pittance. You need to go to Israel right now. You go kiss that stupid ass wall of that Roman fort that they think belongs to their third temple, and you need to go there and apologize. You need to prostrate yourself, and you need to realize not only are you not a good communist, because a lot of the early communists are Jewish, but you also need to realize that you, sir, are offensive. You're anti-Semite. And you should go to Netanyahu and beg his forgiveness.
You know, I'll give that some careful thought there, Robby. Let me take a deep breath. Like, let's just wait. Let's just wait to see what happens. So we'll see what happens here in terms of obviously this development. But I mean, look, let's face it. If Qatar was a big ass country, they could do something about it. They say they're going to go to the UN. The UN's not going to do dick. No. But what this is to me, nothing's going to happen except that it just increases the vibe of Israel in the international community, its reputation as an out of control wild dog that eventually is just going to have to be put down. I'm 62 years old and I don't know how long I'm going to live, but if I had to put money on it, I strongly suspect, Robby, that I'm going to live to see the dissolution of the state of Israel. I would not have said that 3 years ago.
I don't think so. And the reason is Israel has an ace up the hole, and that's called the United States. Now, once the United States kind of comes unglued, all bets are off. And one thing I just want to point out, that Israel's been committing a genocide now for years, and Qatar has said nothing. They've been sitting on their hands. So in a way, I'm hoping that this is a wake-up call to those people, because you cannot negotiate with someone who hates you and wants to kill you and who ignores every kind of norm that there is. You can't negotiate. But it's kind of like what we talked about with Scott Sanish yesterday. You can't negotiate with an ideologue. You can negotiate with someone who disagrees with you and has a rational position. But if in your heart of hearts, if you honestly believe that you are ordained by God, you are God's chosen people, and you can do whatever you want with the backing of one of the three major superpowers on the planet, you can't negotiate with somebody that's like that. The amount of hubris is insane. And the fact that Qatar and the rest of the Arab world has been allowing Israel to commit this genocide for years without so much as a peep, that speaks volumes. Hopefully this is the wake-up call them bastards need, because if it's Qatar today, what makes them think it's not going to be Riyadh tomorrow?
Well, speaking of Riyadh, right, the Saudis, and we should move on, but the Saudis literally allowed the Israelis to transit with 15 fighter jets, F-35 fighter jets, across their territory. I mean, if I'm Qatar, I'm viewing Saudi Arabia. I know that they're not friends, to say the least, but I'm viewing Saudi Arabia as a complicit enemy state. You gave the Israelis permission from the Jewish state to cross the land of Mecca and across your territory, right through the middle, to get and bomb our asses. You sided with them over your Muslim brothers. Fuck you. We hate you. We're going to wait for a chance to get even with you.
Do you think that there's a chance, a snowball's chance in hell, that maybe this will make Qatar rethink its relationship with Iran?
It's a good question. The Iranians need as many friends as they can get.
Yeah.
They're kind of like all alone there except for one little Gulf state as the only majority Shia country. I don't know. I think that's, how like we see game changers every now and then. And we're going to talk about a game changer in the form of that New York City poll. Mamdani is a game changer. Trump was a game changer. This is going to be, if the Sunni Shia divide ends up being reconciled in any important respect by any two major countries, that's going to be a game changer in the Middle East. Because so far, what's happened is the United States has basically sided with the Sunnis, particularly the radical Sunni states like Saudi Arabia, exporters of radical Wahhabism, and that's not going to be, that's not going to. They've tried to isolate Iran, but Iran's the natural civilizational and cultural and economic power in the Middle East. It has thousands of years of history. It's a massive country. It's technologically sophisticated. So, I mean, naturally, Iran should be to the Middle East, logically, what Iran is to what India is to South Asia. They should be the big boys as a regional superpower. And the U.S. has successfully isolated them ever since the Islamic Revolution. But that can't go on forever.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, people misunderstand. An alliance doesn't mean that you have to be friends with the people you're allied with. It just means that we don't like each other, but we both dislike this other person more. Let's work together and sell our hash later on. So just because you enter into an agreement, a strategic alliance, does not mean that you have to put aside all of your differences. It just means that you just realize this other person wants to kick both of your butts. Maybe you should work together this one time. Maybe.
All right, let's move on here. It's the first day. This is tied into the Middle East crisis as well. The first day of this is a Texas story of Raunaq Alam's trial in Tarrant County. I would imagine you pronounce that. Started with debate over whether "fuck Israel" is hate speech or a protected political statement, free speech. Alam and two other people are accused of graffitiing "fuck Israel" on the wall of Uncommon Church in Euless and putting pro-Palestinian stickers on a church sign and flagpole. So for this terrible crime, they're charged with criminal mischief that damaged a place of worship, along with hate crime enhancement, making the potential punishment more severe. If found guilty, Alam could be sentenced to probation or between 2 and 10 years in prison and pay a fine of up to 10 grand. Alam's trial started earlier this week. In her opening statement, his attorney, Adwa Asante, told jurors that her client originally faced a misdemeanor case, but that the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office bumped up the charge. The government manufactured a felony on a graffiti case because they hate his opinions, she said. In Alam's indictment, Tarrant County, Texas, accused him of vandalizing the church because of his bias against Israel and Jews. That's the main thing jurors have to decide. Not on whether he vandalized the church, the prosecutor said, because nobody doubts that he did that. The Texas branch of the Council on American Islamic Relations called on the DA's office to drop the hate crime accusation. By the way, the ACLU is notably absent in all this. Alam was criticizing a country, not a group of people. So here's what went down. Uncommon Church started flying an Israeli flag after the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack. Lead pastor Brad Carignan was called to the stand as the first witness. He said he was heartbroken over the attack and wanted to show solidarity with Israel. The flag prompted Alam to go to the church to vandalize it, according to Welchel. He showed juries photos of the vandalism, including "fuck Israel" in red paint on the wall and stickers on the sign and the flagpole. One sticker showed the Nazi flag next to the Israeli flag, and the other had the slogan "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Asante was largely not permitted by the judge to question Carignan about Israel's actions in the war, including the genocide. Welchel objected to their relevance, and Judge Brian Bolton agreed. Only when the jury was out of the room was she allowed to ask Carignan in detail about his trips to Israel and his relationship with his brother-in-law, who is a veteran of the IDF and a commander in the IDF. In an interview after Monday's proceedings, Asante said, hate crime laws are supposed to protect people, not foreign nations. Israel is a government, and not all Jewish people approve of what Israel is doing. Not even all Israeli citizens approve of what Israel is doing, she said. So the state is equating the state of Israel, the government, to Jewish people, and it's actually anti-Semitic because it seeks to define the politics of Jewish people in one broad stroke. I really like that argument, by the way, Robby. So I find this not surprising, but very chilling that, a serious government entity, a real county in the United States of America under the First Amendment would charge this guy this way. No doubt he vandalized the church. No doubt he should be punished for that. I would say it calls for maybe probation and restitution, like paying for the damage to the church. Certainly he should do that. But, in terms of the rest of it, I mean, this is a church. It's a Zionist church run by a Zionist pastor who's obviously has a strong bias in faith. This wasn't someone who just read in the news about the attacks and thought, oh, how horrible. This is someone who's affiliated with the IDF through their own family. And, so someone sees it. You took a strong stand. Someone took a strong stand against you. Look, fuck Israel is not an anti-Semitic statement. And that's, to me, if I'm on the jury, I'd say there's nothing else to talk about but that. Fuck Israel is not an anti-Semitic statement. It's an anti-Israeli statement. And hate speech laws don't protect that. Now, that said, hate speech laws should not be on the books and are inherently unconstitutional. But that's not what's at stake in this case.
No, I cannot agree with you more. And one of the things that I would really kind of have issue with is any church, and I get into it. You know me. At my own church, I get into it quite a bit with members of the congregation of the church that I go into over this whole concept of Zionism and the Jews being God's chosen people. If you're a Christian, listen to me. This is not for Ted. Ted doesn't go to church. But for those of you who profess to be Christians like I am, if you go to a church and if they have a Israeli flag, you're not at a church. You're in a cult, and you need to get out.
Or you're in a synagogue.
Yeah, you need to read your Bible. For one thing, the Star of David's actually Star of Remphan, otherwise known as Baal, who the Jews, when they're first punished by God, he punished them because they would sacrifice their children to Baal by burning them to death. That star is his symbol, first and foremost.
If you misbehave, you're gonna be sacrificed to Baal. That's what you got coming.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so people, y'all need to wake up. The guy should have. I'm against graffiti as a rule. I think it's stupid. I think it's tacky. I think that you're ruining someone else's property that doesn't belong to you. The guy, sure, charge him with trespassing, make him clean up his graffiti, and get out. But as far as the rest of it, this is stupid. But Texas Governor Greg Abbott is a arch Zionist who has gone so far as to sign executive orders in Texas saying that if you don't swear not to participate in if you do not promise to not participate in boycotts of Israel, then you will lose any chance whatsoever of getting contracts with the government of the state of Texas. I mean, talk about Trump being Israel's bitch. Greg Abbott is on his knees, which is pretty easy because he's in a wheelchair all the time. All the time.
While you're down there.
Yeah, I'm just deep throating Netanyahu and Israel. So, to my dear Christian friends, my Christian brothers, realize that Jesus called them the synagogue of Satan for a reason. Get out of these Zionist churches. Read your Bible. Read the book of Jude. Read Galatians. Read Romans. I mean, the Bible goes so far as to say that they are the enemies of the gospel. So my question is, if you're going to be, if you've got to choose who you're going to serve, are you going to serve the satanic antichrist state of Israel, or are you going to serve Jesus, who you proclaim to believe in? That's why you call yourself a Christian. You can't do both.
So getting back to Texas.
So how's that
I'm
for
always
a rant?
I'm interested in theology, even though I don't go to church. I really seriously am worried that they're going to come down like a ton of bricks just because it's a fucking rural Texas court. It seems like the fix is in. The jury's not going to be able to hear the motivations of the person. He's just going to look like they're conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. And, there's a lot of evangelicals who live in places like rural Texas
who have
a hard on for Israel, right?
Well, I mean, the ADL says and the Southern Poverty Law Center both say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Yeah, they do.
So I need y'all to riddle me this. I can go and burn an American flag. Trump notwithstanding this stupid executive order, nothing happens to me. But if I burn an Israeli flag as an American citizen on American soil, crime. I could be put under the jail, the First Amendment notwithstanding.
I like what Ray C said. Jury nullification would be nice in this case. I agree. I think that basically the best we can really hope for here is that it goes, this will be appealed. I think they're going to lose. I think that these three defendants are going to end up in the various appellate divisions going up to the Texas State Supreme Court. And I'm hoping sanity prevails at the state level.
Yeah. I don't see it happening in Texas.
I'd be worried about it going to SCOTUS. I'm not convinced they would do the right thing.
No, of course they wouldn't. I mean, so okay, I got to be careful about what I say here because we're on YouTube. I wish we're just on Rumble today. The United States has a population of 360 million people, give or take, if you figure in the illegals and everything else. The Supreme Court is made up of 9 people. And for decades, the Supreme Court justices, fact check me on this, come from Ivy League schools. I'm trying to say this without butchering myself. And almost to a man for the last 100 years have either been Roman Catholic or Jew. And they're a tiny segment of the population. And so my question is,
mostly WASPs. I hate to say it.
Yeah,
there's not that many Catholics on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, and so I mean, if you have a population, and the vast majority of the population at least considers themselves to be Christian or Protestant, why do we not have any Protestant Christians on the Supreme Court? You got to wonder.
Well, what do you mean? There's Protestant Christians on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Which one?
I'm gonna have to check that. But there have been historically.
Oh yeah, there have been, but for not the last 100 years.
Oh come on, really?
No, yeah.
I'm gonna keep talking. I'm gonna look this up. This is that can't be true.
Fact check it.
Protestant.
Give me a witness.
All right. We'll see. If you're right about this, I'm gonna be like, holy shit.
Hey,
because that's bizarre. Because it's such an incredibly. All right. Well, Ketanji Jackson identifies as a non-denominational Protestant. Neil Gorsuch was raised Catholic, is now Episcopal, so he's Protestant. John Paul Stevens, who I always think sounds like he's in a stadium rock band, was a Protestant. He was a mainline Protestant. He was the last. I can't believe they gave me such a short list here. All right, expanded list here. Yeah, that's what I want. Sandra Day O'Connor was an Episcopalian. William Rehnquist, of course, was a Chief Justice. He was a Lutheran. So, I mean, I would say he was the highest profile. But Sandra Day O'Connor certainly was important. I mean, she cast the deciding vote in Bush v. Gore and installed Bush as president. So, she was important.
What do you think what do you think that she got for that?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, she claimed that it was just because she wanted to retire. She claimed that she was hoping to retire and wanted to be replaced by a fellow Republican, which, by the way, is didn't used to be the tradition at all until the 1970s. There was no expectation that a member of the court would be replaced by a member of the same. There was generally an expectation that the president would ignore their own party. So let's say when Nixon had a liberal justice to replace, he would appoint another liberal to try to keep the balance of the court the same, and that only started to change later on. And so when Sandra Day when she was on the court, it was 2000. She wanted to retire in that term. She's like, oh, if I put Bush in, she said this later. And she said she regretted it because it did so much damage to the reputation of the court that she wanted to retire and go back to her ranch in Arizona. So she chose Bush just so that she'd be able to be replaced by a Republican and the balance of the court would stay the same. Pretty gross. She's kind of a gross, yucky person. And she's dead now, so we can say that. but I would say it when she was alive. All right, let's move on here. France is in chaos. More than 250 people have been arrested so far today as the Bloquons Tout, Block Everything protesters attempted to paralyze transportation and daily life across France. This is 2 days after the French government of François Bayrou, the former prime minister, collapsed over attempts to impose unpopular austerity measures. The authorities deployed 80,000 cops and gendarmes as thousands of demonstrators lit fires, built barricades, and blocked Paris's Ring Highway, Europe's busiest urban motorway. Prefecture of Paris reports 100 arrests so far in the Paris area, plus 8 outside the capital by mid-morning local time. At Porte de Montreuil in eastern Paris, protesters set trash on fire and obstructed tram tracks before the cops came in and drove them away. Demonstrators also got onto the highway to try to block traffic. The cops also went there. The tensions also grew around the Gare du Nord, which is the northern train station in Paris, one of the busiest in the world, where a few hundred people gathered by 10:30 a.m. Chants of Macron démission, step down Macron, have been heard ever since. The cops have also closed off the train station. However, the protesters are trying to bust in anyway. Law enforcement has since deployed tear gas against the demonstrators, and some tourists were also caught up in the chaos. I'm protesting today because we're sick of it all, Marie, a student and actress, told Euronews. Today we are here to show Macron that we're done with all of this. He can't just keep ignoring us and what the people want, Marie explained, adding that she was also protesting against the budget cuts that will affect the cultural sector. One thing you have to understand about France is they have a cabinet-level ministry of culture that actually funds the arts in a much more robust way than we have here in the U.S. Also, in terms of the ignoring, which he's referring to, is that there were snap elections called by Macron, which the far left won, but Macron ignored all the results and just kept his conservative center-right government in as prime minister. He's now on prime minister number 5 out of 2 years. Meanwhile, an unnamed driver who took it upon himself to clear the bikes and trash cans, barricading the road, told Euronews that he supports the demonstrations. I do understand their anger. Something needs to be done, he said. The nationwide protests organized through social media and Telegram don't have any central leadership. They emerged spontaneously following the government collapse and Macron's appointment of longtime center-right ally Sébastien Lecornu as the new prime minister. He's probably going to age about as well as Liz Truss did. No blockade will be tolerated, warned outgoing Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau as the Interministerial Crisis Unit convened at 9 o'clock in the morning local time here. The leaderless movement gained momentum from anger over inflation, austerity, and a dysfunctional political class. Unlike the Yellow Vests protests, Bloqué Tout emerged this summer with less organization, but a lot of support online. New poll shows 46% of the French people support the movement, including many people on the left, but also more than half of the people who support the far-right National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen. Two major unions, the CGT, the Conseil Général du Travail, which is the communist labor union, and SUD, backed Wednesday's actions, while broader strikes are planned for the 18th of September. Eric Chalal, representative of Sud Rail Paris, one of the two unions that have joined the protest, said the organization came to show its dissatisfaction that's been accumulating for months. What's being expressed today is what we've been feeling all summer, fed up and angry since the Bayrou budget was announced, asking us to work more, Chalal said. We're fed up with paying, we're working hard, we're barely managing to keep our heads above water, and to think that the hole in the deficit would be our fault is unbearable to hear. Sounds familiar, huh, Robby?
Yeah, a little bit. So, I mean, specifically, what is exactly that they are mad about? Like, what is it that the French are pissed about?
Well, so basically, the French have they worked very, very hard over the last 75 to 100 years to build up a very sturdy social safety net. In France, taxes are a little higher than ours, not much higher. And in return for that, you get a lot. As a French citizen, you're guaranteed that you will never have to pay for a doctor. You will never have to pay to send your kid to college, not much anyway. You will you will be able to retire with dignity starting at the age of 62. I think about my grandparents in France who were taken care of from cradle to grave. And like, for example, when my grandmother was getting older, they sent a home care attendant to live with her 24/7, cook her meals, do her laundry, keep her company, and keep an eye on her. And it's a really good system instead of loading people into a for-profit nursing home, business that's worth billions of dollars and treats old people like shit, like we have here in the U.S. The French are mad because basically the French, the elite class don't want to pay their fair share of taxes. They are spectacularly wealthy, and they want to spend a shit ton of money on military spending. Most recently, they're saying we want to spend more money to fight the Russians and to help Ukraine. They also imposed all sorts of sanctions on Russia, including going without Russian energy, natural gas and oil, which France imported a lot of until the Russo-Ukrainian war. And of course, the French didn't do shit about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline demolition by the Biden administration. So they're just mad about all that because it's like, look, you guys are driving the fucking economy into the fucking ground. And you want us to pay for it, and you don't want to pay anything, and we don't want to work. It's like if we were all in it together, then we would all work together and we'd all sacrifice together. But that's not how it is. You want us to bear all of the burden while you guys live like it's 1760 and Louis the 15th is the king of France. You guys they're living large. I mean, the aristocrats and the super rich in France live a very nice life, and they don't want to give up any of their prerogatives. So this is very class centric.
Gotcha. So do you know Macron? No, there's been a few times where he's threatened to send the French army into Ukraine. Does that figure into this at all, or is this just more economics?
It's more economics. I mean, the thing is, Macron can talk about sending the French army into Ukraine with boots on the ground. They will never. The French people will never go with this. I mean, you have to understand, Robby, we're talking about a president who has a 15% approval rating. To put that into perspective, Richard Nixon had a much higher approval rating when he was forced to resign in 1974. So I don't see how you can govern with a 15% approval rating. I don't see how you can. He has 2 more years left on his second and last term. I don't see how he makes it to 2027.
I see how he does it. I mean, if you make it where your political rivals can't run for office or serve if they get elected, and then you just ignore elections, in the Ukrainian model, which France is doing.
That's what they're doing.
Then, he could serve an entirely other term. I mean, why not?
Well, they can't. There's a term limit. You can only serve 2 5-year terms.
Ignore it. Just ignore it.
Well,
you got to remember.
You'll have a revolution. The French are not like us. They are the land of the free and the brave. They will burn the country down rather than let this stay.
Does immigration play into this at all?
It does. I mean, immigration. Look, the France per capita has taken in a lot more undocumented people over the last 20 years than the United States has. So the pressure and the social effect and the blowback has benefited the far right and also the far left to a lesser extent. But basically, there's a lot of illegal immigrants who work off the books. They take French jobs, and also they're changing sort of the complexion of what people like from my parents' generation would have viewed as a traditional France, right? I mean, look, like all countries, France has always changed, but the fact is that 100 years ago, 75 years ago, what we would have thought of France as a white Catholic country. Look, nobody even goes to mass anymore. So are they really even Catholic? Sure, culturally, but nobody's going to mass anymore. And now you have a lot of immigration, particularly from sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a big shock, even like as an American tourist, it's startling when you walk through the streets of like a French city and you'll see like, black as coal African dudes hanging out. And it's like, whoa, you just don't expect it. It's not like it's a bad thing or that they're dangerous or anything, but it's surprising. And I think it's had a sort of it's provoked a conservative reaction among a lot of traditional, more conservative-minded Frenchmen, and there's a strong conservative streak in French culture. So I think immigration, it's also something that, like here, the government never tried to sell it to the French people. They just did it. These people just showed up. And it was like, okay, they live here and some of them are going to take some jobs. And, France has never been a place where it was easy to find work ever. And it's just becoming harder. And young people are pissed. And I think there's just so yeah, no question. I mean, that's a long-winded answer to say, fuck yeah.
Gotcha. Because the reason why I bring that up is, you mentioned the labor unions. Cesar Chavez back in the day, I mean, he was famously known for sicking Mexican Americans on people crossing the border. And so I'm just wondering that are the labor unions in France have the same kind of concern? If people are concerned about wages not keeping up with the cost of living, then immigration has got to be addressed, because by nature it drives down wages.
Yeah, it does. And the thing is, I think that there's both, like we mentioned, the two unions there, right? These are both left-leaning unions. And part of left-wing politics in France, as it is here, is that you're not allowed to be nativist or nationalist. But I should say not nativist. So they're anti-racist. So they don't want to. They view the immigrants from Africa as being victims of the capitalist class who are exploiting them as well as French workers by allowing this immigration. So they want to attack the policy, not the people. But there are right-wing labor unions as well who have a more nationalist, and maybe racist orientation, certainly nativist. But I think no one in France really realistically thinks you can do mass deportations, especially with the history of what mass deportations meant during World War II. It meant that people were being sent to their deaths. They're not going to do that. They just won't, due to their history. But I think a lot of part of the problem too is also the hangover of the EU. I mean, so from a practical standpoint, if an illegal immigrant enters Greece, well, they can go, now they're in Europe, they can travel freely anywhere in Europe, including to France. They can't be stopped. So even if France guards its own borders, it doesn't make any difference because it's not allowed to close its borders to, say, Italy or whatever, or Switzerland or whatever. So there's that. And then it's very, so I think also a lot of Frenchmen feel that they lost their sovereignty in this form and others to the EU. And I think there's a lot of regrets for having joined the EU.
Do you think that Frexit could be a thing that France could pull?
Yes.
Could pull in England, say, "Fuck you all, we're leaving."
I think it could. I don't think it's at this point. I don't think it's likelier than not that it won't happen. But if you follow the trend line, I could see a future in a year or two or three where Frexit becomes a serious consideration.
I hope they do. I'm serious, because these multinational organizations, all they do is destroy the sovereignty of your nation. Get out of them. And you can call me a nativist or a racist, whatever. I do not care. France should be French. Greece should be Greek. America should be American. Call me what you want, but that's how I see it.
And let's move on. 2 years after October 7th, 2023 attack, New Yorkers now broadly sympathize with the Palestinians more than they do with the Israelis. New Yorkers. Now, bear in mind that one of the reasons that Israel exists is because President Harry Truman wanted to win New York in the 1948 election, and he decided to endorse the foundation of the creation of Israel in order to get the Jewish vote in New York, right? So in New York, this is according to a new survey by the New York Times and Siena University. The gap of perspectives toward the conflict, 44% of New York voters now sympathize with the Palestinians. 26% sympathize more with Israel. That's a huge gap. Is stark given that the city is home to the biggest Jewish population outside of Israel in the world. The poll also found that voters broadly think that criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. 51% of New Yorkers say it's not anti-Semitic. 31% say it is. Mamdani's beliefs would traditionally be considered disqualifying, and they're certainly not the same as Eric Adams or Andrew Cuomo's, but they, along with Curtis Lewa, the Republican, are far behind Mamdani. Adams and Cuomo have relentlessly criticized Mamdani, his stance on Israel, calling him an anti-Semite and terrorist sympathizer. The poll sort of shows that that Adams and Cuomo probably wasted a lot of their energy to attack Mamdani's views on Israel. In fact, those attacks seem to be helping Mamdani go up in the polls. In fact, Mamdani now has a lead among Jewish likely voters in New York City. He's about 30%, closely followed by Adams and Cuomo among Jewish voters. 70% of Jewish voters said that they sympathize with Israel somewhat. 20% say they sympathize with the Palestinians. Overall, Mamdani leads the pack in terms of who voters think has best addressed the conflict. 39% of New Yorkers say they think he's got the best approach. 17% said Cuomo, 10% said Adams. Mamdani's backers are, of course, more likely to be pro-Palestinian. Cuomo's supporters are slightly more sympathetic to Israel, 38%, but 28% were also sympathetic to the Palestinians, and 18% supported both equally. Even among Cuomo's people, only half said that he had done a good job addressing the conflict. 12% of Cuomo's supporters say Mamdani's actually doing a better job on that issue. And basically, Mamdani's whole shtick has been, listen, I'm not talking about that. This is where where I stand, but I'm running as mayor of New York City, not mayor of Tel Aviv, and I'm going to focus on the economic problems facing New Yorkers. So that's been his campaign.
And as a right winger, I would vote for Mamdani if I lived in New York. Off of that one thing right there. Everything else, I don't agree with this man on anything.
You're against fast free buses?
Listen, I want as little government. I want as little government in my life as possible. That being said, what won me over with Mamdani when they were all on that debate stage, and they were asking, what foreign country would you go to? And people are going, oh, I would go to Ukraine, or I would go to Israel, or I would go to both of them. And then Mamdani says, I'm not going to go anywhere because I'm ready to be the mayor of New York. People can't afford to live here anymore. For me, that's enough. All I want is a politician who's actually able to at least address the fact that the American people have got problems. That's all I'm looking for.
It's not asking. It's really not asking for a lot.
No, it's not, and that's why Trump got elected. Trump's legacy is destroyed because he burned it down because he turned his back on the people that won him the presidency not once but twice. And yeah,
Trump's lucky he doesn't have to run for re-election, but it'll be really. And what do you think is going to happen next year with the midterms? Do you think? Do you think it'll be a big shift, and if so, in which direction? Or do you think things will kind of stay where they are? I mean, it's hard to say because of all of the redistricting battles in the various states like Texas and California.
I think that if Trump, I'm about to give you an answer in a way that's I can't codify in any way, shape, or form, but I think that Trump's going to lose, and the reason is that if he would have ran on actually bringing jobs back to America, stop protecting pedophiles over the Epstein stuff, and actually went to places like Indiana, to Ohio, to Michigan, and actually campaigned to pressure Congress to actually pass laws to start reindustrializing the country, the Democrats would have got destroyed because you can't run against that message. You cannot run against bringing American jobs back at the expense of corporations and shareholders. Trump did not do any of that stuff. Instead, he's throwing out these BS tariffs to protect an industry that doesn't even exist anymore. What's the point? And so, no, I think the Republicans are going to lose. I think J.D. Vance, people keep saying he's the heir apparent. I don't see J.D. Vance winning the presidency in the next presidential election. He's hitched his star to Trump, and Trump has blown up his own brand.
And Trump hasn't handed him the torch, right? I mean, that's kind of the issue too, right? Like, it's kind of like if Trump chose Vance as his heir apparent, and it was basically like, you, son, all of the MAGA world will be yours someday. But, it reminds me a little bit of what happened with Harris and Biden. Biden wasn't in any shape to train himself, much less anyone else. But, Biden didn't really treat Harris as a protege and didn't like have her learn the ropes and didn't allow her to have any what's the word I'm looking for? Any experience. Of the limelight. He didn't put her in charge of anything and say, hey, he put her in charge of the border, which was completely an unwinnable task. But he didn't give her something and say like, hey, you go out and shine, you do you, that'll help you get more popular for 2024. I kind of see the same thing with Vance, right? I mean, Vance right now is being, he's in the shadows. When we hear from him, he's just being a lickspittle. The most interesting thing he did was yell at Zelensky.
Yeah. And that's it. I'll tell you what I would love to see. And if this happens, and I need to talk to Ted about this, because not Ted, I need to talk to John about this because he knows Thomas Massie. If Thomas Massie and MTG, if they run together, I think that they would peel enough of the MAGA base like me and enough of the left who are pissed off, who are actually really America first. I think that they could completely blow up the two-party system. I really do think that they could do it. If those two ran together, that would be a political alliance that would transcend both political parties and tap directly into the rage that normal people feel. And that could be a winning ticket.
Well, how would that look? I mean, blowing up the two-party system, I mean, it is kind of baked into the way that the Electoral College was created, yeah?
Well, the Electoral College was created before we even had political parties. I mean, the entire point of the Electoral College was at the beginning was that each state, the reason they're called states and not provinces, is that they're supposed to be sovereign, independent states linked together in a federal system. And the whole reason why the college exists is that way larger states couldn't just dominate smaller ones by virtue of population. Well, the states who are getting destroyed are frankly, they're bigger states. New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania. U.S. Steel is dead. They're looking to the Japanese to save them. Is that going to happen or not? And even if it does, then what happens? Then you got Georgia. The South Koreans are saying, "Oh, there's no qualified American construction workers. We have to bring over South Korean visa overstays to build stuff because Americans are too stupid, too lazy to do it." I mean, this is MTG's backyard. I mean, that's like one county over from where she is. Thomas Massie, he's running on the debt, and if those two go,
you think that they could run for president? I mean, they could never be elected. Yes. They could never be elected, though.
They don't have to be elected. All they've got to
Democrats would never vote for them.
The Democrats wouldn't, but I bet you a lot of leftists would.
They would have to be a radical reinvention of tone and imagery for the left to come on board because of their histories of being so right wing.
Well, let me ask you a question. It's going to be a matter of remember how we were talking about Qatar and Iran and alliances of convenience? Who are the only two people in Congress who are going to war against Israel? The Democrats are underwater right now over Israel. That's why Shapiro in Pennsylvania can't be president.
That's true.
I know it's true. And so you have Orange Hitler, who the Democrats say this guy is Hitler reincarnate, who not only has threatened to primary Thomas Massie, he's actually thrown his weight in endorsements against people who Thomas Massie has defeated in primaries. He's trying to do the same thing to Marjorie Taylor Greene over Israel.
Yeah, but Israel. I mean, the thing is, the United States is not a one. It's not a one issue.
No, it's not.
Electorate.
It's about jobs.
And the left, for the left, first and foremost, you would have to. First of all, neither MTG nor Thomas Massey have articulated. They both say like we shouldn't be sending money overseas to these bullshit. Okay, everyone on the left is like, "Yay, you're right." Yeah. Okay, but when you say that, how are you going? Where's your social program? Where's your healthcare program? What are you going to do about college costs? What are you going to do about like increasing wages for American workers? What are you going to do about the minimum wage? They're silent on these issues. That's why the left can't be there for them.
Well, they're silent right now. But what I'm saying is, though, and who knows, the two of them, maybe I'm just reaching for the sky, and I'm just wanting to actually see. Maybe this is my wishful thinking. It very well could be. But if they sat down, if they thought through this, if they had to sit down with Ted Rall, John Kiriakou, and then there's other people on the left
that is
and
a
the
fantasy.
right. Oh, well, hey,
operators are standing by. Call up.
100%. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if you want to win, I mean, the best social program right now to address everything that you just now talked about, the cost of housing, the cost of healthcare, the cost of education, is bringing back jobs. Well, if they run on that,
or I mean, but the thing is, we don't really need jobs. People don't need jobs. They want people. Why do people go for a job? They go for a job because they need money.
Yeah.
Okay. So people need money, and that's what we should be thinking: is how can we put as much money into as many Americans' pockets as quickly as possible? That's literally what everybody in politics should be thinking about 24/7, even in their sleep, right?
Yeah. It's the economy, stupid. I mean, isn't that the old saying?
But they're not thinking about that. And I think so. Some people, we need to bring back jobs. That's part of the equation. But I think we also have to start paying people a stipend just for being alive. Sort of the way the Alaskans get the oil pipeline money.
Sure.
And because like as Elon Musk has explained, I mean, AI is going to replace a lot of jobs, and that's not a bad thing. That should be a great thing. We should be able to say, like, a lot of people don't need to work. And you know what? Like, if we pay people to stay at home, we're an industrious people. A lot of us will be like, I don't want to sit around watching fucking TV all day. I'd rather start a business, That's so funny. Ray saying, I get too much TMI, then later I need deprogrammed. That's right. TMI in the morning, DMZ at noon, and deprogramming in the afternoon. It's a whole way of life. All right. So let's get into, speaking of which, I've got to wrap this up and get ready for DMZ.
Yeah,
so last story.
We're pulling a Manila.
Yeah. No, I am. That's bad. All right. We'll be very quick here. All right. For the first time, there are more kids in the world who are obese than underweight, according to UNICEF. 1 out of 10 of kids between the age of 5 and 19, 188 million kids and young people are now obese. Researchers blame a shift from traditional diets to ultra-processed foods that are cheap and high in calories. UNICEF is urging governments to protect kids' diets from unhealthy ingredients and stop ultra-processed foods and the industry that makes them from interfering in policy decisions. When health experts used to refer to malnourished kids, they usually were talking about those who were underweight, like I was when I was a kid. Not anymore. That term now also refers to the impact of obesity on the health and development of children. Even in poorer countries, that's now a real concern. Kids are considered overweight when they're significantly healthier than a heavyweight for their age, sex, and height, of course. Good nutrition, including fruits, vegetables, and proteins, play a vital role in growth, cognitive development, and mental health. But unfortunately, those diets are being replaced by ultra-processed crap, high in sugar, starch, salt, unhealthy fats, additives, chemicals, you name it. UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell says the challenges posed by obesity should not be underestimated. She says it's a growing concern that can affect the health and development of children. Undernutrition, which can manifest itself as wasting and stunting, is still a major problem in the under 5 category in low and middle income countries. But the latest data from 190 countries finds the prevalence of underage kids 5 to 19 has actually gone down over the last 25 years from 13 to 9%. Obesity's gone up at the same time from 3 to 9.4%. So almost 1 in 10 kids is now obese. This has also increased to the extent that 1 in 5 school-age children and adolescents is overweight. That's almost 400 million kids around the world. Obesity now exceeds underweight in every region on Earth, except for sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Highest rates of obesity are in the Pacific Islands, including Niue, the Cook Islands, and Nauru. Well, they'll be all underwater soon anyway, so who cares? But many high-income countries also face a serious obesity problem. Among the 5 to 19 sect, 27% are obese in Chile, 20% here in the US, and 20% also in the UAE. So really interesting, because we think of malnutrition one way, but it's obviously, it not. And I really, as you know, Robby, I had high hopes for RFK Jr., at least doing something here in the US about all these ultra processed foods. But as far as I can tell, all he's doing is continue to dick around with COVID vaccines. And, dude, it's not 2020 anymore. Could we move on and talk about the issues that matter now? And these ultra processed additives and all that stuff, that's the crap that I want to see the administration go after.
Yeah, it should all be banned. Honestly,
it should be.
It's poison. It is poison. And you took the words right out of my mouth. Where's RFK Jr.? What is he doing? Seriously,
Scary Girl's asking about Nepal. Yeah, we'll talk about that on Deprogram for sure. So, Scary Girl, please bring that up then. Running short on time here. Any thoughts about this before we close it out and get ready for DMZ?
Not just that our government hates us and they want us poisoned and they want us stupid and too medicated to fight back.
I think that's about accurate. Guys, thanks so much for watching us here on TMI. We're here Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Please follow, and share the show. This show is definitely kind of stalling in terms of money and viewers. So, anything you can do to sort of help us amp it up would be much appreciated. Manila's out the rest of the week. Robby will be sitting in for her. Thank you, Robby, for doing that. Manila should be back on Monday next week. And I will be back later today, 12 noon Eastern time with Scott Standis for DMZ America. And as always, Monday through Friday on Deprogram with John Kiriakou and myself at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So thanks, everyone. And
let me
go ahead.
Let me run an ad real quick before we go.
Let's do it.
Rumble just gave us one.
Great.
Speaking of money, just 1 second. Deal with the Southern drawl, Ted. You probably noticed Rumble is growing fast. It's not slowing down. They're building a real alternative to big tech that puts creators first and actually protects free speech. And now there's Rumble Premium, an easy way to upgrade your experience. With Premium, you get ad-free viewing across the platform, no pre-rolls, no interruptions, just the content you came for. Plus, Premium members unlock exclusive content like bonus videos, behind-the-scenes drops, and more from your favorite creators. Right now, Rumble is offering $10 off an annual subscription. Just go to rumble.com/premium and use the promo code studio at checkout. That's rumble.com/premium, promo code studio. No ads, more freedom, and content you actually care about. That's the deal. There we go.
Bye.